The camera zoomed in on the faces of the Dominion officers, their smug expressions gleaming beneath the cold blue lights of their flagship's war room. The screens were alive with holographic displays, showing Earth's final defense fleets scattered across the solar system, desperately trying to hold off the incoming Zephyrian invasion. "Look at them," the Dominion general sneered, a tall figure with reptilian features. His sharp voice crackled through the broadcast. "Humans, so fragile, so insignificant. This is their finest military? Pathetic." Laughter rippled through the high-ranking officers seated around him, their voices cold and disdainful. The general gestured toward an image of Earth's flagship, the USS Pioneera, a barely functional relic from Earth's first days in space. It now floated above Earth's atmosphere, flanked by a few dozen defense ships, all clearly outmatched by the Zephyrians' sleek, powerful warships. "That's all they have to defend their precious homeworld," the general continued. "They send their entire fleet to face us. How quaint." He scoffed, twisting the knife. "It's almost as if they believe they have a chance." A chorus of laughter echoed again, this time from all corners of the massive bridge. Among them, a young officer, barely, more than a cadet in the grand scheme of things, chimed in with a voice that dripped with condescension. "Perhaps they'll surprise us," she said with a smirk. "If they're lucky, maybe one of their ships will manage to clip one of ours." The general's lips curled into a smile. "Perhaps they'll surprise us indeed. Too bad they won't live long enough to do so." Back on Earth, Sergeant James Davidson, known as Jace to his comrades, watched from the depths of a secure military bunker beneath the British Isles. The mocking broadcast echoed through the sterile walls of the command center. His jaw clenched tight as each disparaging word hammered into him like 1,000 blows. His blood simmered, and for a brief moment he almost considered tearing off the headset, walking out and leaving the madness behind. But something inside him snapped. These aliens had just made the mistake of underestimating the human spirit. On a nearby screen, the Zephyrian Empire's warfleet began their final push. The invasion was imminent. Thousands of ships lined up in formation, their sleek hulls gleaming in the cold expanse of space, ready to unleash devastation on the fragile Earth below. Jace ran a hand through his short-cropped hair and took a long, slow breath. He had seen war before. He had seen blood and carnage and had stared death in the face countless times. But this was different. This wasn't just about survival. This was about pride, about proving that humans were more than just another conquest. He stood abruptly, pushing away from the console. His boots clicked sharply against the polished floor as he strode toward the command center's main door. The personnel inside were too busy monitoring data feeds and receiving orders from above to notice him. With a curt nod to his commanding officer, Jace was given a single mission: infiltrate. "You're the best we've got, Davidson," his commander had said, voice gruff with the weight of desperation. "We need intel. We need to know their plans. Earth's forces are crumbling under the Zephyrians' assault, but this might just give us a chance to turn the tide." Jace knew what he had to do. He had to go behind enemy lines. A lone operative, in the heart of the Zephyrian flagship, taking down their strategic infrastructure and sabotaging the heart of their war machine. The mission was suicidal, but that was all the more reason for him to do it. He looked out across the war room, his eyes hardening as the Zephyrian smug faces flickered on a nearby screen. They'd regret underestimating humanity. With a final, determined glance toward the door, he turned and walked into the shadows, his mind already working through the plan. It was time to show the Empire what humans could really do. Jace's heart pounded in his chest as he slipped through the ventilation. Ducts of the Zephyrian flagship, his breath steady despite the high-stakes mission. The ship's artificial gravity system hummed softly in the background, a stark reminder of the alien technology that surrounded him. Yet his mind was laser-focused, navigating with ease through the maze-like interior of the vessel. This was his world: silence, darkness, and the quiet thrill of moving undetected. He had trained for years for moments like this, the clean, efficient strike against an enemy far stronger than he. But even as he crawled through the belly of this massive warship, Part of him felt the weight of the mission's true danger. The Zephyrian Empire wasn't like any enemy Earth had faced before. Their ships were advanced, their weapons deadly, and their arrogance insufferable. The moment they realized who or what he was, they would unleash hell. But for now, he was invisible. Jace moved with precision, following the schematics he'd memorized in preparation for the mission. Every vent, every service hatch, every maintenance shaft, the whole ship had been mapped out in his mind. The first obstacle was a secured access point leading to the main command corridor. He had no idea what kind of security measures the Zephyrians used, but the Earth team had given him a custom-made hacking tool, a small device that could bypass most basic systems. He pressed it against the panel, and the lock disengaged with a soft click. In and out. No mistakes. As he entered the darkened hall, a flickering overhead light revealed two Zephyrian soldiers standing guard at the intersection. They were humanoid in shape, but towering, with sleek scales and glowing tattoos, marking their skin. Their eyes, sharp and predatory, scanned the surroundings with unnatural precision. Jace froze, holding his breath. There was no time to plan a clean approach. His only option was speed. His heart raced as he pressed himself against the wall, waiting for the soldiers to turn away. A flicker of movement. The guard's conversation drifted through the air in a guttural language he couldn't understand, their voices just low enough not to be heard by the sensors embedded in the walls. Jace glanced at the guard closest to him, a hulking figure with a wicked-looking blade at his side. The other guard stepped forward, his back turned. In that split second, Jace moved. His feet were quiet as he lunged forward, a swift motion sending the nearest soldier crashing into the wall with a sickening thud. His hand shot up, covering the soldier's mouth before the alien could make a sound. The other guard whirled around just as Jace slammed the blade into his side, neutralizing him in one swift, efficient strike. Both aliens crumpled to the floor, their weapons skidding across the smooth floor. Jace wasted no time. He dragged their bodies into the shadows and continued down the corridor, leaving no trace of the brief confrontation. His mind raced ahead, planning his next move. The command center was just a few corridors away, but it wasn't just the Zephyrians that he needed to worry about. The ship's AI defense systems would be aware of his breach soon enough, and they wouldn't hesitate to wipe him out. As Jace reached the next junction, a sudden voice echoed in his earpiece. "Davidson, do you copy?" It was Colonel Pierce, the mission commander. Jace gritted his teeth, irritated that he'd been distracted by the battle. "Loud and clear, Colonel." His voice was low, barely a whisper. "I'm in." There was a pause on the other end. "Understood. But stay sharp. We've got reports of Zephyrian reinforcements arriving. They know you're here." Jace didn't respond. He didn't need to. He was already moving, his every muscle primed for the task ahead. The time for conversation was over. He was in the heart of the Zephyrian Empire now, and nothing, no matter how overwhelming, would stop him from completing the mission. Not even an entire empire. The Zephyrian flagship was like a living organism, its corridors sprawling endlessly, the very air thick with the hum of alien technology. Jace's breath was steady, every movement calculated, as he made his way deeper into the heart of the ship. His eyes darted between his surroundings, scanning for potential threats while his mind was focused on the mission ahead. Ahead of him lay the engine room, where the massive reactors powered the ship's core systems. A single explosive placed there could disable the entire vessel, setting back the Zephyrian invasion for months. But it wouldn't be easy. The core was heavily guarded, surrounded by a labyrinth of security systems, and the longer he spent on the ship, the more time the Zephyrians had to adapt to his presence. Jace was no stranger to danger. But this was a whole new level of risk. He crouched beside a maintenance hatch, pulling out a small device, an EMP charge that would temporarily disable the ship's surveillance systems, allowing him to move undetected. With a practiced hand, he set the device into the junction box and activated it, watching as the ship's lights flickered and dimmed for a fraction of a second. For now, the eyes of the ship were blind. He moved quickly, his feet light against the metal floors. As he rounded a corner, the faint sound of voices reached his ears. 2 Zephyrian soldiers were stationed outside the reactor room, speaking in their native tongue, sharp, guttural, with an undercurrent of pride. Jace's instincts flared. He didn't have time for a fight. He had to get in and out without leaving a trace. His hand went to the knife at his belt. One clean strike, and they'd be down before they knew it. But then, something unexpected happened. One of the guards, a massive alien with glowing green tattoos that ran across his muscular arms, suddenly stiffened, his eyes widening as though something caught his attention. Jace froze, his heart racing. Was it the device? Had his EMP triggered an alarm? The guard sniffed the air, a low growl rumbling in his throat. The hairs on Jace's neck stood on end. The guard's head swiveled to face his direction. In a split second, Jace reacted, launching himself to the side and pressing his back against the wall. His hand shot out, grabbing a nearby fire extinguisher, which he hurled at the guard. The heavy canister collided with the alien's head with a sickening thud, sending him staggering backward, dazed. The second soldier whipped around, his rifle already raised, but Jace was faster. With one swift movement, he darted forward, closing the distance and striking the guard's weapon arm, sending the rifle clattering to the floor. The Zephyrian roared in fury, but Jace was already on him, using his momentum to slam the alien against the wall. The soldier crumpled to the floor in a heap, unconscious. Jace exhaled slowly, forcing the adrenaline to steady his nerves. He quickly dragged the bodies into a nearby maintenance alcove, stowing them out of sight. But his brief moment of relief was interrupted by the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps echoing down the hallway. They were coming. He had no time to waste. With a final glance at the disabled guards, Jace sprinted toward the reactor room. As he reached the door, he paused for a moment, ensuring there were no more surprises waiting for him. The door slid open with a hiss, revealing the room's interior, a vast chamber filled with intricate alien machinery. Pipes and conduits ran along the walls, all connected to the central reactor core, which pulsed with a menacing glow. Jace's fingers hovered over the detonator. He'd planted the charges inside the reactor several hours earlier, carefully calculating every placement. One push, and the whole system would go critical. The Zephyrians would never see it coming, but just as he was about to activate the detonator, the door behind him slammed shut with a deafening thud, and Jace whipped around, his pulse spiking. A voice, smooth and confident, echoed from the shadows. "Did you really think you could sabotage my ship without consequence?" Jace's hand tightened around the detonator as he came face to face with Commander Zalara, the Zephyrian officer who had been leading the ship's security efforts. Her glowing eyes locked onto him and her lips curled into a cold smile. "I admire your courage, human," she continued, stepping forward. "But you're too late." The lights flickered, and Jace felt the temperature in the room drop, as though the ship itself was preparing for battle. He didn't flinch. "I'm just getting started," Zalara's smile deepened. "We'll see about that." As the tension between them thickened, Jace realized that the sabotage was only the beginning. The real fight, the one that would decide Earth's future, was just beginning. The air crackled with tension as Commander Zalara's glowing eyes locked onto Jace, her form imposing in the dimly lit reactor room. He could feel the ship around him shift as though it were sensing the gravity of the situation. She was one of the Empire's most lethal officers, calculated, cold, and merciless. Jace had expected this confrontation, but now that it was here, his instincts screamed that this would be a battle of wits, not just brute force. "You know," she said softly, her voice low and dangerous, "your people's persistence is almost admirable, but futile." Jace didn't respond. His mind was racing. The detonator. He had to press it, but Zalara was standing too close, her hand resting on the hilt of her blade. Any sudden movement, and she'd be on him in an instant. Her eyes narrowed, studying him, reading him as though he were an open book. He had no idea how much she knew, whether she was aware of his sabotage or was just playing with him, waiting for him to make a mistake. She took a step forward, and the door to the reactor room slid shut with a mechanical hiss. He was trapped. There was no way out without a fight. Humans always think they can defeat us through sheer willpower, she continued, her lips curling into a bitter smile. You're outnumbered, outgunned, and outclassed. This ship alone is enough to wipe Earth from existence. Her gaze flicked to the massive reactor behind her, its ominous hum filling the room. I'm sure your little explosives won't be enough to stop us. Jace's eyes darted around the room, calculating. Zilara was right. He was surrounded, and even if he detonated the charges, it might not be enough to destroy the entire ship. The Zephyrians were meticulous, and their flagship was a behemoth, reinforced with layers of armor and defensive systems that could withstand a nuclear blast. But Earth couldn't afford to be defeated by mere tactics. They had to show the Zephyrians that they had underestimated the most dangerous thing in the galaxy, human resilience. A sudden idea sparked in Jace's mind. He couldn't win by overpowering her, that much was certain, but maybe he didn't need to. He needed to outsmart her. Zilara must have seen something shift in his expression because her smile widened. She stepped closer, reaching for her blade. You're thinking too much, human, she sneered. In the end, you'll die just like the rest. Jace's hand moved swiftly to the detonator. He clicked the button. Nothing happened. For a moment, the world seemed to freeze. Zilara's confident expression faltered, her eyes narrowing. Then the doors to the reactor room slammed open, and Jace heard the unmistakable sound of armored footsteps echoing down the corridor. Reinforcements. Zephyrian troops ready to overwhelm him. Before Zilara could react, Jace dove toward the maintenance console near the reactor's core. His fingers flew over the controls, activating the ship's backup systems. The system flickered, and a sharp alarm rang through the room, signaling that the AI defense systems had been activated. It wasn't perfect, but it would buy him some time. Zilara hissed in frustration. She lunged at him, but Jace was already moving. He ducked beneath her blade and rolled, narrowly avoiding the deadly swing. The momentum carried him toward the far side of the room, where the engine access panels lined the wall. He scrambled over to them, pulling a small pulse disruptor from his pack. The weapon was designed to cause temporary disruptions in the ship's circuitry. Zilara turned, fury etched across her face. You can't escape. Not escaping. Jace grunted, his fingers trembling as he jammed the disruptor into the panel. Sparks flew, and for a moment the lights flickered again. Then everything went black. A total blackout. In the darkness, Jace didn't waste a second. His training kicked in, his senses heightened by the sudden lack of sight. He could hear the Zephyrian soldiers charging down the hall, the clank of their armored boots growing louder, but they wouldn't be able to see him, and that was all the advantage he needed. Zilara's voice rang out, her tone now filled with rage. You'll regret this, human. You can't hide forever. Jace grinned to himself. Maybe not forever, but just long enough. He moved like a shadow, slipping through the blackened corridors of the flagship, retracing the path he'd memorized earlier. His mind worked in overdrive, calculating his next move, weighing the risks, and adjusting his plan. He couldn't hold out indefinitely. The reinforcements were already coming, and Zilara wasn't the type to be easily defeated. But as he sprinted through the ship's belly, the flickering emergency lights gave him the edge. He was human after all, adaptable, creative, and never willing to back down. He had no intention of giving up. The fight wasn't over, and the Empire would soon learn that a single soldier could change the course of a war. The ship was plunged into complete darkness. No lights, no sound, except for the soft hum of the alien reactors deep within the Zephyrian flagship. Jace's heart pounded in his chest, but his mind was calm. The sudden loss of sight didn't faze him. He had trained for moments like this when everything was stacked against him. Zephyrian technology might have been advanced, but humans thrived in the chaos of battle. His footsteps were light, quiet, his body low to the ground. He had no choice now but to rely on his instincts and his knowledge of the ship's layout. The EMP had worked, at least temporarily, and now he had the advantage of a temporary lull. For a few precious moments, the Zephyrian sensors would be blind, and their forces would be scrambling to react to the blackout. Jace navigated through the dim emergency lights that flickered sporadically, illuminating the hallways and fractured pulses. He moved quickly, his thoughts centered on one thing: the reactor. The charges he'd planted earlier were still active, but the longer he took, the more likely it was that Zilara's forces would regain control of the situation. As he rounded a corner, the echo of boots grew louder, this time not just any boots. These were Zephyrian soldiers, their armor clanking against the floor as they quickly moved into position. They had been anticipating this, no doubt, and they were closing in on him. But Jace wasn't about to run. He pressed himself flat against the wall, drawing his pistol. The soldiers' footsteps grew louder, their voices carrying faintly as they communicated in their harsh language. The first soldier rounded the corner, his helmet scanning the hallway, the faint glow from his visor illuminating the darkness. Jace didn't wait for the second soldier to enter the space. With a surge of energy, he lunged forward. The soldier didn't even have time to react as Jace's fist connected with his helmet, sending the Zephyrian crashing to the floor with a grunt. Before the second soldier could react, Jace dropped to his knees and used the soldier's momentum to throw him against the wall. The impact stunned him long enough for Jace to reach the soldier's weapon and pull it free, aiming it at the downed guard. A single shot. The Zephyrian soldier's body went limp. He grabbed the fallen soldier's communicator, tossing it into the darkness. It would buy him more time to move forward. Jace didn't pause. He moved swiftly and decisively, pushing onward. He had a new plan now. He was going to hit the reactor room once again, but this time, he was going to take control of it before Zilara and her forces could shut him down. The main command center was now only a few corridors away. He could feel it in his bones. The security measures would be high, but they weren't invulnerable. He had already outsmarted the first line of defense. Now, the game was changing. If he could disable the ship's central command and plant a sabotage signal within their systems, it would trigger an automatic countdown, activating a self-destruct sequence. But there was no time to waste. Zilara would be after him in full force now. She wasn't going to let him win, not without a fight. As he approached the command center, Jace heard the unmistakable hum of the Zephyrian AI's voice over the ship-wide communication system, its cold, emotionless tone reverberating through the walls. Warning: security breach detected in Reactor Room Alpha. All personnel report to secondary command stations. It had already begun. The countdown had started. Jace couldn't afford to wait. The main reactor needed to go critical, and soon. He would need to disable their security systems and manually trigger the sequence before Zilara's forces could reach him. As he sprinted down the corridor, his mind raced through the steps. The AI would try to shut down his progress, but he had one last ace up his sleeve: an encrypted override code. It had taken weeks to decrypt, and the odds of getting it just right were slim. But if he could access the ship's AI interface, he could set the self-destruct in motion, then slip away into the chaos before they could stop him. At the door to the central control room, Jace slowed, his breath steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He took a deep breath, counting to 3 before pressing the small, glowing interface at the door's center. The door slid open with a sharp hiss. Inside, rows of consoles flickered to life, revealing the heart of the ship's operations. Dozens of screens and terminals blinked with activity, monitoring the ship's systems and troop movements. But it was the AI core in the center of the room that held his focus. Jace wasted no time. He sprinted toward the core, bypassing a few remaining Zephyrian officers who were too distracted to see him coming. In one smooth motion, he connected his hacking device into the interface panel. The AI's response was immediate. Intruder detected. Terminating access. The screen flashed red, and the security lockdown engaged. But Jace's fingers were already flying over the controls, entering the encrypted override code at lightning speed. The AI's protests became more frantic. But he didn't let up, and then, at last, the countdown began. A deep hum filled the room, The self-destruct sequence had been activated. The clock was ticking. The countdown had begun. Jace's heart hammered in his chest as the deep mechanical hum of the self-destruct sequence reverberated through the Zephyrian flagship. His fingers flew across the console, desperately entering the last lines of code that would seal the ship's fate. The AI's voice filled the room with an eerie calm, as if unaware of the human on the other side of the interface. Self-destruct sequence initiated. T-20 minutes until detonation. There was no turning back now. The Zephyrians would not allow him to escape easily, and he was all too aware that they would throw everything they had at him to stop this from happening. The only thing standing between him and the destruction of their ship and the salvation of Earth was time. A warning flashed on the console. Security breach detected. Lockdown protocols activated. All escape routes sealed. Perfect. Now, there was no way out. Jace didn't panic. There was no room for panic in moments like this. He had prepared for this contingency. The Zephyrian Empire was vast, but their arrogance had blinded them to one simple fact. Humans could adapt. Every corner of the ship, every inch of its layout had been memorized. And even if he couldn't escape by conventional means, there were other ways. His mind worked quickly, scanning the nearest terminal. The map of the ship flickered on the screen, showing multiple exits now locked and secured. However, there was one alternative route he hadn't explored yet. An old maintenance tunnel that could lead him deep into the ship's underbelly. It wasn't ideal, but it was his best shot. Jace moved quickly, shutting down the terminal and sprinting toward the far end of the control room. The Zephyrian reinforcements were already on their way. He could hear their footsteps echoing down the hallway, the sound growing louder with each passing second. They were closing in. As he reached the maintenance door, he slapped the activation panel, cursing under his breath when it failed to open. Another lock. He quickly pulled out his small toolkit from his belt and began working on the security lock. Each second felt like an eternity. The countdown was ticking. There was no time for mistakes. Warning. Intruder identified. Terminating access. The AI's cold voice continued to taunt him. With a final twist of his wrist, the lock disengaged and the door slid open with a soft hiss. Jace slipped inside, just as a group of Zephyrian soldiers rounded the corner. He pressed himself against the cold metal wall, heart racing, breath shallow. The soldiers marched past without noticing him, too focused on the chaos unfolding above. He was in. The maintenance tunnels were narrow, dark, and uncomfortably cramped, but they were a safe passage for now. Jace's mind raced ahead. The only way to survive was to make it to the escape pods located on the far side of the ship. It was a gamble. The escape pods had been sealed by the lockdown, but if he could find a way to hack into the control panel, there might still be a chance to escape before the ship went up in flames. The tunnels seemed endless as he crawled, every sound amplified in the oppressive silence. The deeper he went, the more he felt the weight of the mission. He had come this far, but the battle was far from over. Zilara's forces would be hunting him, and the self-destruct countdown was already at 15 minutes. There was no room for error. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Jace reached the rear of the ship. He could hear the escape pod launch bay up ahead, the low hum of machinery echoing through the walls. But there was something else. A faint, clicking noise. The distinct sound of a Zephyrian patrol moving in his direction. Jace froze. His options were dwindling. He had to move now, or he would be trapped. With a deep breath, he sprinted forward, his legs aching from the cramped crawl through the tunnels. He reached the escape pod bay, and his eyes scanned the room for the control panel. A guard stood by the door, his back turned, but it wouldn't last. The door was still locked. Jace slid to the panel and began working frantically. He didn't have much time. He was painfully aware that the Zephyrian guards would soon realize the breach in the system. As the seconds ticked down, he felt the adrenaline surge. This was his last shot. The AI would not let him escape without a fight. T-10 minutes to detonation. The screen flashed. The countdown was rapidly approaching 0. Jace's hand hovered over the final command. The escape pod. Doors unlocked with a mechanical whine. He didn't hesitate. He threw himself inside. Just as the doors slid shut, a shot rang out, and the Zephyrian patrol burst into the room. But it was too late. The pod shot out of the ship, escaping into the vastness of space as the Zephyrian flagship loomed ominously in the distance. Jace breathed a sigh of relief, but it was only brief. He had survived, but the fight for Earth was far from over. The countdown was nearing its end. The Zephyrian Empire was about to lose one of its most prized warships, but that would only be the beginning. The escape pod jolted violently as it tore through the void of space. Jace's body slammed against the padded seat, the seatbelts straining, under the pressure, but he didn't flinch. His eyes were fixed on the tiny window in front of him, watching as the Zephyrian flagship grew smaller and smaller in the distance, until it was nothing more than a silhouette against the backdrop of distant stars. He couldn't see it yet, but he knew the explosion would be catastrophic. The ship had been a leviathan of war, a flagship capable of laying waste to entire planets. But now, thanks to him, it would be no more than space debris. The self-destruct sequence was set to trigger in just a few minutes. Jace reached up and wiped the sweat from his brow, his pulse still racing despite the apparent safety of the pod. The past several hours had been a blur, a whirlwind of combat, deception, and strategy, but it was far from over. Earth's war against the Zephyrian Empire was just beginning, and he had no intention of sitting on the sidelines. His communications console beeped, pulling him out of his thoughts. He pressed a button, connecting to the emergency channel that had been set up by the Global Defense Forces. The screen flickered and General Harper's face appeared. "Jace, where the hell are you? We lost contact with you back on the flagship." Harper's voice crackled through the static. Jace chuckled softly, though it wasn't a happy laugh. "I'm alive. Barely." He paused, eyes flicking to the countdown timer on the pod's console. "But I'm not out of the woods yet. The flagship is going down. Going." Harper's eyes widened. "What? How much time do we have?" Jace checked the timer. "Maybe 5 minutes. It's a big ship, so I'm guessing the explosion will be delayed slightly. But the Zephyrian Empire just lost one of its most important warships, and we've just set the tone for the next phase of this war." Harper nodded, his gaze serious. "Well, it's good to have you back in one piece, but we need you to keep going. You've done more than anyone could have expected, but Earth needs you now more than ever. The Empire won't take this lying down." Jace swallowed hard. He could feel the weight of the Empire's inevitable retaliation bearing down on him. The Zephyrians were not a race that took failure lightly. They would come for Earth, and they would come with everything they had. He glanced out of the window again, just as the first explosion rippled through the distant flagship. The shockwave hit his escape pod a moment later, rattling the hull and causing the pod to spin uncontrollably for a few seconds. The light outside the window turned a deep orange, the explosion lighting up the void like a star going nova. Jace breathed in sharply, watching the ship break apart in the distance. The energy release was enormous, and it was just the beginning. Pieces of the flagship were disintegrating into stardust, and he could see several smaller fragments being propelled away from the blast. He had done it, but at what cost? "How long until you're back on Earth?" Harper's voice broke through his thoughts. Jace shook his head, forcing his mind to focus. He had no time for regret. The fight wasn't over. "I'm not going back yet," he said, his voice steady. "The Zephyrians have underestimated humanity, and we can't let them make that mistake again. I've got more work to do." Harper's face hardened with resolve. "Understood. Do what you need to do. But remember, you're not alone in this. The world is behind you." Jace nodded, turning off the communication feed. He had come so far, he had fought and sacrificed, but he knew deep down that the real war was yet to be fought. The Zephyrian Empire would retaliate, and Earth would need every advantage they could get. Jace had become the symbol of that fight, one man against an empire that had believed itself invincible. The escape pod coasted through space, its systems engaged in a slow, controlled drift. The countdown continued, now down to 3 minutes. Jace leaned back in the seat, eyes closed, his mind running through the next steps. His escape was only the beginning of something much larger. The Zephyrians would retaliate with everything they had. But now, they would know what humanity was capable of. And the fight was far from over. As the seconds ticked away, Jace's thoughts turned to Earth, his planet, his people, and he promised himself one thing. No matter the cost, he wouldn't let them fall. The future was uncertain, but Jace had learned something in that moment. Humanity wasn't going down without a fight. And the Zephyrians would soon understand that lesson the hard way. The escape pod's descent was calm now. The explosion of the Zephyrian flagship still echoed in Jace's mind, the vivid image of it breaking apart, the shockwave that rippled through the emptiness of space. But there was no time for him to bask in the victory. He had only moments to prepare for what would come next, and the reality of the situation gripped him harder than ever before. The Zephyrians would retaliate. They would hunt him, but they would also be hunting Earth. The escape pod's controls beeped, signaling that it was nearing the Earth's atmosphere. Jace glanced at the control panel, seeing the green glow of the re-entry sequence being activated. The flickering countdown to the ship's destruction had now faded, replaced by a steady stream of emergency protocols designed to guide him safely back to the surface. His hand instinctively tightened on the control stick. He was going home. But there was little comfort in that thought. Earth wasn't safe, not with the Zephyrian Empire knowing what he had done. The destruction of the flagship, the attack on their pride, it was personal now. He could already feel the storm gathering in the distance, the undeniable truth that Earth was now the target of a deadly reprisal. His pod hit the upper atmosphere with a deep rumble, the sensation of gravity tugging him down. The view outside. The window darkened and Jace could see the massive cloud systems forming over the oceans below. The blue and green of Earth was a stark contrast to the cold, empty vacuum of space. For a brief moment he allowed himself to simply watch, remembering how fragile this planet was, how fragile humanity was. "This is ground control to escape pod. Please respond." The voice crackled through his comms, breaking his reverie. Jace snapped to attention. "This is Jace Morrow responding. What's the status on the ground?" "Jace, it's good to hear your voice. You're coming in hot. We've got military units standing by for extraction. We've been tracking your descent. It's tight, but you're gonna make it." Jace didn't have time for pleasantries. "Zephyrians are coming. We're not out of danger yet. I need immediate access to secure lines. I need to speak with command. We've only just begun." There was a brief silence on the line, and then the voice returned, its tone urgent but reassuring. "Understood. We'll have everything ready for you when you land. You've made a mark, Jace. The world's watching. Let's finish this." Jace didn't respond immediately. He didn't need to. He already knew what came next. The Zephyrian Empire wouldn't stop until they'd wiped Earth off the map. They had underestimated him once. Now they would understand. Humanity's resolve was not to be dismissed. As the pod plunged deeper into the atmosphere, Jace tightened his grip on the controls. Earth was no longer a passive player in the war. It was a beacon of defiance, a symbol to every corner of the galaxy that humanity could and would fight back against tyranny. The escape pod rocked as it breached the cloud cover and began to level out, speeding toward the landing zone. He could already see the lights of military vehicles and emergency responders flashing below. His escape had gone unnoticed for the most part, but that wouldn't last. The war was about to shift, and Jace Morrow was about to lead humanity's resistance. With a final, jolting impact, the pod landed, skidding to a halt on the tarmac just outside the military base. The moment the hatch opened, Jace was greeted by a rush of air, the scent of Earth's soil and the sounds of a waiting team. Trained soldiers, technicians, and commanders, all prepared to move on his orders. A figure stepped forward, her face shadowed by a military cap, but there was no mistaking the authority in her stance. General Harper. "Jace," she said, her voice steady, eyes burning with determination. "You're a hero, but we're not done. The Empire will be back." "I know," Jace replied, his voice calm but resolute. "And this time, we'll be ready." The Zephyrian Empire had dealt the first blow, but Earth had proven that it could rise up and strike back. Jace Morrow had set the stage for the war ahead, a war that would define the future of humanity. The fight for Earth had only just begun, but Jace was ready. The dawn of the Resistance had arrived.